She's been working in this area for around 10 years, and during this time she's written 3 books, is that correct? She's also, and I think she's also the co-author of the Good Practice Guide, which certainly for colleagues joining us in the UK will know that that's been a very influential document for anyone thinking about addressing plagiarism in the UK particularly. And the Good Practice Guide has been a sort of a blueprint for the JISC project, which started the approach in the UK 10 years ago. And it's certainly something which people still refer to even today as a way of thinking about institutional approaches to plagiarism from various different aspects. This was while Jude was based at Oxford Brookes University in the UK. She's also, she worked in Sweden for a year on sabbatical, and she's currently working as an independent consultant and travels the world talking to academics and students about plagiarism and promoting academic integrity, and has always very interesting stories to tell about her travels and the different cultures and perspectives which she encounters. So that's enough from me, I think. I'll pass over to Jude, and she can give us her thoughts on why students plagiarize. Thank you, Jude.
Hello. This is a strange thing to sit in my office and talk to people all over the world about this question of why do students plagiarize. And I thank Jill for the chance, and I hope that as I talk, you'll get ideas and thoughts and questions. There'll be time for those, as well as some questionnaires so people can share their own experiences. This is a series, these webinars, and this is the first one. And it starts with this question, why do students plagiarize? I'm going to be using PowerPoints, and I'm going to read what the PowerPoints say, because I'm aware that people are joining this webinar from all over the world. And sometimes it's easier if you read the PowerPoints, if people are trying to listen to me and read at the same time. It can be difficult. So I hope it's going to work, and I hope this technology won't let us down. It gives us a wonderful chance around the world to be thinking about this question together. When people ask this question, why do students plagiarize? Answers are very numerous. There are many, many reasons. People often say to me, yes, and many, many excuses. And we will be talking about some of those today. As soon as people start asking these questions, they also, and my PowerPoints are not doing what I want them to do, but basically what this PowerPoint is going to say in the partial reveal, and if the partial reveals don't actually work, then I'm going to be in trouble. But anyway, if you ask this question, why do students plagiarize? It also triggers lots of other questions. And if my slide was working correctly, the questions would come up like, how many of them do it? How often? Is it getting more or is it getting less? What should we do when we find them? How do we stop them? So the question, why do they plagiarize, is never a question that stops there. It always triggers lots of other questions. Now, all those other questions, like what can we do to stop them, and how can we find out that they're doing it, and all those other questions that happen if you start with why, those are really important questions, but different webinars are going to address those questions. I'm going to stick with the why. Why do students plagiarize? Now, the interesting thing about thinking about this why question, why do they do it, is that why is actually 2 questions. So you can ask why, looking at the past, meaning what caused them to do this? Why did they do it? Meaning, why did they come to making this action which we judge to be plagiarism? So I'm going to be looking at some of the why questions that looked at how did they come to do it from the past. But you also can ask why, looking to the future. So you can say, you can say, why did they do it? Meaning, what are they trying to achieve? What's trying to be the benefit that the student hopes to take by using plagiarism? So I'm going to talk about, none of my reveal slides are working. This is really a problem because I have lots of them in this presentation. I don't know if Jill can do anything about this, but what I was going to say on this slide is I'm going to, yeah?
We can progress them from here if you like, yeah. So if you say next, we can click them for you.
Go ahead. Okay. What I'm hoping is that the partial reveals will come up rather than the next slide. Can you do that, please? Are you clicking? Because I see no change. I'm going to talk without worrying too much about the slides because I've said this so many times I can say it without a slide. I'm going to talk about the reasons that are in the past that lead to students plagiarizing. And I'm going to talk about some of the benefits that students hope to achieve by plagiarism. I'm also going to remind you that there is a tip sheet that Jill has created, and the tip sheet has a lot of these ideas in them. So the sheet she's going to show you at the end of this webinar will say some of the things that I'm going to say. So why do they do it looking to the past? Why do they do it looking to the future? For the benefits. So let's start with the benefits. What are the benefits that students are trying to achieve from plagiarism? And that means that we have to start with thinking about deliberate cheating. And I've put deliberate cheating in blue because we're talking about students choosing to plagiarize through cheating. It, of course, makes us start asking the question, what is cheating and why do students cheat? And the answer for me is that cheating using plagiarism probably has the same causes as cheating using loads of other things, taking a mobile phone into an exam or getting a hold of the answers before the exam happens, and all the ways in which students can cheat. So cheating using plagiarism probably has the same sorts of causes, and it probably is done with the same kind of wish for outcomes. It's really important to remember that not all plagiarism is cheating. Not all plagiarism is cheating. Not all, and I keep saying that many times because when I travel the world and I talk to people, people often assume that plagiarism and cheating are the same thing. They are synonyms for each other. They're the same word, but that's not true. There's lots of plagiarism that isn't cheating. But some is. So I'm starting with talking about deliberate cheating because that's where you start talking about why students plagiarize for benefits, for getting benefits out at the end. So this is the way I think about plagiarism in terms of the continuum of examples of seriousness. If you look at this line on my slide, it starts from the bottom left and it goes up toward the top right. All along that line, there are examples of plagiarism. Students passing off someone else's work without acknowledgement. That's what plagiarism is. Students might do that down in the bottom quarter down here. Students might do that because they do not know the rules. They don't know what's expected. They don't know what we want them to do. And still, they break the rules. Now, breaking the rules without knowing the rules is still breaking the rules, but it's an example of misunderstanding. Students don't understand what we want. At some point, they start to understand and look at that middle section where they think they know and they make a mistake. They think they understand what we want, but they've got it wrong. They think they understand how to use referencing systems, but they don't. They do the wrong thing. And at some point, they cross this red line. They move into the area I think about as misconduct, where they cheat. They intend to deceive. They intend to get an unfair benefit. So when I'm talking about why do students cheat using plagiarism, I'm up in that top quadrant of plagiarism cases. Why do they cheat? What's the cause of them cheating? And why do they cheat? What are the benefits they want from cheating using plagiarism? Well, the benefits are clear. They want to gain an advantage unfairly. They want that advantage, but they don't do it in a fair way. They want to avoid the work and they want to get the reward. That's quite important, that avoiding work. I'm going to come back to that avoiding work part because later on we'll talk about how you design assessments where that avoiding work is not possible. They also want to create a false impression. They want the person who's seeing their work to think better of them than they deserve. That they want them to think they're a better researcher, or they've done more work, or they're a better writer, or so forth and so on. However, the causes are quite interesting. Why do students cheat using plagiarism? And the first most common cause is they lack the necessary skills. They can't do it any other way. They lack the skills to use sources, to use other people's work, and to do it correctly. Or they lack the skills to do it well enough for what they want. The second reason they cheat using plagiarism is that they don't think they're going to get caught. Now, these causes begin to get important because as you start looking at them, the not getting caught is part of the solution. It's part of how you deal with it. They don't think they're going to get caught and they do it. A lot of times they say, well, there is a risk, but it's a risk worth taking. They feel that the penalties are not high enough to be a deterrent. That's important. We need to get penalties that are high enough for deliberate cheating so it's a deterrent. And the last cause, and it's quite a common one, is they think, well, I don't care if I learn this or not. I'm willing to miss out on this learning opportunity. Now, if you look at those causes of cheating by plagiarism, it's quite interesting to think about this cheating by plagiarism in 2013. And we're going to be doing a little questionnaire. You're going to get involved in a minute, especially around this question, how much cheating using plagiarism is there around? Now, how much is happening is by far the most common question I get asked by journalists, and I get asked it all the time. And my answer is, we don't really know. We haven't got good enough data. We've got lots of guesses. We've got lots of people who think they know. We've got lots of small-scale surveys that may or may not help us. But the rate is highly variable around the world. So this is a really good opportunity because people are listening to this from all over the world to get some sense of what do you think in terms of how much cheating using plagiarism is going on. There is some evidence to show that it might be rising, but not very much, probably from not very high. But then we don't really know because the surveys are not done carefully enough. We do know that there's more opportunities now than ever to cheat using plagiarism. There's more networking, more communication around the world, more communication and resources, more to copy, more to take, and much better search engines and abilities to find them. So Jill, could you put up the questionnaire about what people on this webinar, what do they think in terms of how much cheating using plagiarism is going on? Can you put that up? Yes. Oh, I love it when it works like that. Now, could people have a look at the questions and give us your answer? Let's see how the answers come in. That's the misunderstanding questionnaire, Jill. That's the one for the end. But let's see what people think. Aha, now you've put the cheating one up. Well done, thank you. Interesting. It's coming in now. I'm sure everybody can see. Things have stopped moving. So I'm going to assume you've more or less put your guesses in. You can see from the answers that most people put the numbers somewhere between under 50% and under 30%. So people are saying quite a significant number of their cases they think are deliberate cases where students have sought to deceive or to create a false impression or to get a benefit without doing the work. That's interesting. I wonder if you would like to think yourself right now about whether you're surprised by that not at all. It would also be really interesting if we had the capacity to find out what kind of geographical distribution there is for those responses. Where do people around the world come from who are making these guesses? That's really fine. Thank you. If we could close it. Thank you. So back to my slides. There is significant cheating using plagiarism. By your estimation, some of you are saying 30% or lower. Some of you are saying 50% or lower. Many of you are saying smaller numbers. A few are saying larger. And a small number say they don't know. It's certainly true, to repeat my point, that there are more opportunities than ever. There's more networking. That's quite important because students often use each other around the world, putting up postings and asking questions in blogs or in chat rooms or in social networking sites where they get additional help and support. Remember that the definition of plagiarism is not just copying. So those of you who are answering that question about deliberate cheating, if you were only thinking about copying, then you probably weren't thinking wide enough. Plagiarism is not just about copying. It's not just about copying other people's words. That's an assumption that people make all over the world, that it's about copying words. It's about taking someone's work and then not acknowledging the originator of the work transparently. Plagiarism is not about copying, it's not about words, it's about work and not acknowledging the originator. I use this definition, which, it's now working with Reveal, this is wonderful. This is a definition which says plagiarism occurs when someone submits the work product. And I really like that word, work product. I'm going to come back to why that's important when talking about why they do it in a minute. If you submit the work product of a named or identifiable person or source, this is one of the reasons students find this so confusing, is they're not sure what's from a named source and what's not. In a situation where originality is expected, that means not all situations expect students to be original, and students are not always sometimes clear about where it is and where it isn't expected. Without showing the source of the work, and sometimes misunderstanding comes from not understanding how you show the source and what kind of strategies you use to show the source. And this is for credit or benefit. So the definition says it's not plagiarism if you do it in draft, or if you do it in notes, or if you do it along the way. It's only when you hand it in and say, give me some credit, give me some benefit, that it becomes plagiarism. If you don't show the source, if it's supposed to be original, if it comes from a named person. So here we are, definition. And then I do this. Now, this business of the difference between that, and I'm hoping what's coming up on your screen is the name Fishman 2009, is I'm saying, look, this is not my definition of plagiarism. This is not me saying this here. It's actually Teddy Fishman, who runs the Center for Academic Integrity in the US, and who's written a really nice paper using this definition. And I really like it, so I use it. But I use it with a citation. And for many of our students, understanding the difference between that without the citation and that with the citation is really, really tough. There is one more thing I need to do, and that is put in my quote marks. Now, I put in my quote marks because these are the actual words that Teddy Fishman used. So if you think about all the complicated things that are going on in that definition and in the citation and in the quote marks, it shows how complicated and difficult this idea is for students. So this business about what is plagiarism, what is cheating, what is plagiarism using cheating, what is cheating using plagiarism, is quite difficult. Many people do not know what this word plagiarism means. This includes students, teachers, it certainly includes journalists, but many of them think that they know, and they have false ideas, and that's important, because one of the reasons we're looking at the causes is we have to look at the causes for what plagiarism really is and not what we think it is. So to go back to cheating, we cheat using other people's work without acknowledging that we've used their work. And we can do that much more than we ever have been able to because of networking, resources for copy paste, efficient searching, much more sophisticated ways of hiding and disguising illegitimate use. There's a lot of opportunities that are increased because we have more coursework, more assignments that carry credit, and certainly more commissioning sites. By commissioning sites, I mean what some people call contract cheating. It's basically you pay, I write. It's students who can contact sites that write for them, that they pay money and somebody writes it and they submit it, the students submit it as if it's own. We certainly have lots more commissioning sites. Not really sure how many more, not really sure what the impact is of these commissioning sites, but there are certainly a lot of them. So here we are, back to reasons for seeking unfair benefit. We've got opportunity, we've got sense of what you've put up a, we're not quite here yet. We've got opportunity, we've got poor time management, we've got commissioning sites, we've got chances to find stuff, we've got much better search engines than we've ever had. And all of these, plus bad decision making by students, lead to cheating. Now, should we panic about cheating using plagiarism? Loads of people think that we should. Here's a newspaper article. This one actually comes from an Australian newspaper. This was the 10th of May in this year. And those of you who can't see the subheadline, it says, "Students fail to understand plagiarism rules." Now, it's interesting that the subhead says, "Students fail to understand plagiarism rules," but the great big headline says, "Cut and paste cheats." Now, this kind of panicking, this kind of example of journalists trying to make a hot story and trying to get us to really worry about how much really deliberate, serious cheating goes on, can sometimes distort people's ideas about how common or how prevalent this kind of cheating might be. If you read the article, it says they have fewer than 10 serious cases per year, and they have 35,000 students. Now, around the world, I can hear you all saying that is a massive underestimation for the number of serious cases. But even if it is out by a factor of 10 or even 100, it's important to really remember that with 35,000 students doing 10, 15 coursework assignments a year, the number of serious cases, it would appear in this particular instance, and this is a university that I know well, and I know manages plagiarism cases very competently and has been doing so for a long time. I know their systems, I know what they're doing, I know how well engaged they are in dealing with this issue. And they say fewer than 10 serious cases, even if they're out by 100 times. What we know is that the number of very serious cases is much smaller than people want us to panic about. So what are the lessons from the Let's Panic headlines? More than 35,000 students, fewer than 10 serious cases. I think you don't start by thinking about cheating. You don't start by saying, how can I stop serious cheating? You start by thinking, how do I make sure that those 35,000 students do their own work, use their own words, acknowledge their sources, and so forth and so on. That's the lesson for me in terms of why do students do it? Where do we need to put our attention? Where do we need to put our energy? So I'm going to finish this bit with deliberate cheating by making some suggestions about how you stop it. And then I'm going to take a few questions, if there are some, and then go back to looking at why do students do it through misunderstanding or through different assumptions about what is being asked of them. If you're going to stop deliberate cheating, you don't start with stopping deliberate cheating. You start with the aim of supporting learning and building students' skills. That's the only thing that's going to work. It's the only thing that makes any sense. It's the only thing that has a rational approach behind it. But you pay attention to the reasons and causes that students give for deliberate cheating using plagiarism. So you make particular attention to the chance of getting caught. Places in the world that I visit where the chances of getting caught are very low have much more problems with students cheating deliberately because they make a judgment that they won't get caught. You look at your penalties. Are they high enough? We've had several interesting studies that look at when the penalties are high enough to dissuade students from not taking the risk, that's really significant in shaping their decisions whether they want to cheat or not. I think particularly penalties around commissioning sites ought to be very high indeed. I think that the consequences of asking someone to do your work for you for money are so severe, in my view, that some very serious penalties, including asking the student to leave the course, should apply and should apply generally. One of the things I find as I travel around the world is that many, many more universities also take this approach, where if you use a commissioning site, they tend to throw you out. And you need to make sure that the students know the consequences. What are the consequences if I decide to cheat with plagiarism? So Jill, have you got a questionnaire now or questions that are coming in? Jill? Jill, I'm not hearing anything from you. I'm not sure what to do now, but I'm going to make a decision. Since I can't hear anything from Jill, I'm going to deal with a question that I just saw coming up from Wendy Sutherland Smith. Hello, Wendy, in Australia. Let's see if I can find it again. Wendy says, question for Jude. What strategies are there for reducing students buying customized work, which can be of high quality? High quality work is much more difficult than poor quality work. Poor quality work is by and large plagiarized. By and large, because they don't pay very much. The person who makes it doesn't do very much work. And it's really easy to find poor quality work using the standard search engines, the standard text matching software that many universities now use. Detecting high quality work is much more difficult. The people who've studied this for a long time say that really the only thing you can do is use process approaches so that you check along the way that the process is going on, that the student is actually writing. You look at drafts and you show students, you get students to present to each other. You ask students to talk to you about what they're doing and so forth and so on. High quality work is hard to find. Okay, anybody, is there another?
Can people hear me there? Can anyone hear me?
Now I can hear you, Jill.
Oh, that's great. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened. Yes, we did have a comment about scheduling of assignments and how that can help. And I think that's probably something that will be dealt with in more detail in one of our other webinars on assessment design. But I don't know if you wanted to mention about that and how that can prevent perhaps deliberate cheating and prevent that sort of pressure at deadline time.
Definitely. There are quite a few good studies about procrastination, about delay, about students not getting started. And there's a lot of evidence to show that students don't get started until the last minute. And the more you can get students started and get them going without making yourself really too busy and putting your own workload up, the better. So delay and leaving it to the last minute often means that students have very, very few choices. And for many of them, it can feel like their only choice is to cheat.
And we've had another point that I think would be useful to pick up on about how do you know, or how can you work out if students have used a contract cheating site? What strategies might you be able to use if you suspect that?
Right. You will have another webinar on detection. So these things probably can come up there as well.
Yeah.
That's a difficult one. And certainly Thomas Lancaster, who has studied this for quite a long time, it's worth looking at some of his work if you're particularly interested in dealing with contract cheating. Thomas Lancaster, and I've got a list of resources at the end of this PowerPoint, and it mentions his work with Bob as well. If you're trying to find out whether students are using contract cheating sites, probably you may have luck on your side. There is sometimes good luck. I mean, students do the most remarkably stupid things with their work. So for example, I know of students who leave in the name and address of the contract cheating site in their paper, those kinds of smoking gun type things. We also had one student who didn't pay his bill, so the contract cheating site reported him to the university. So I think, you sometimes can get lucky like that. But much more systematic ways are, as I said before, process ones. So it's much more difficult to simulate a process than it is to simulate a product. So by focusing on the process, by making the students show that the process is underway, by asking the students to see that work going along, chunking it up, and so forth and so on, those are ways that will sometimes help. And finally, you can authenticate. And I think authentication activities, so for example, randomly vivaing, talking to 10% of the group just to see whether they know what's going on or not, that kind of thing. Those kinds of strategies can work. I've written about all of those in resources that are, I think, on your website, Jill,
Yes,
on how to design out. Okay, shall we go on?
Yeah, just one more point we might just pick up on about general knowledge. How is that defined? I think that's sort of the idea of common knowledge. I don't know if you wanted to comment. I'm going slightly off at a tangent here, but it's something that might be worth mentioning.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why I really like Teddy Fishman's definition, is that it puts common knowledge right in the center of what's going on there. So what is more useful than thinking about common knowledge is thinking about the opposite, thinking about how something gets linked to a named or identifiable source. It's much easier to help students understand the linkage to a named or identifiable source. And then by default, if it's not linked to a named or identifiable source, it becomes common knowledge. So common knowledge is a very difficult one because anybody who's new to a discipline or to a situation or to a context will not have common knowledge. So what's much more useful is to say to the student, can you link this idea or this point or this statement to an identifiable or named person or source? Then you should cite it. You should acknowledge it. If everybody knows this, it's unlikely to be linked to a common or identifiable source. If you had to do some research to find it out, it probably is. There's the second point there, and I know I'm going off track and I'm very aware of time and I need to get back onto what I was going to be talking about. But there is a second sort of set of ideas in here, and that is the idea of authority, of giving authority. So when we want students to cite or acknowledge somebody else's ideas, it's partly because of worries about plagiarism, but it's mostly because we want students to have authority in what they say, to be able to show that what they say has power, has believability, has strength. It's got authority. And so you cite for authority reasons as much as for any other. If you want to know, is this common knowledge? You can probably think, does it link to a named person? But you still might want to cite common knowledge for reasons of authority. that it's a complicated one. Right.
Thanks for
Let's
that,
go
Jude.
back, shall we?
Let's go back,
Hmm?
shall we? Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I'm moving from stopping deliberate cheating, hopefully. I've lost my little buttons and they don't seem to work, Jill. So could you give me my buttons back? Nothing that I click makes it move.
I don't know where they've gone. I haven't
All
done
right,
anything here.
can you move it on then, please?
I'll try move you on.
Thank you. Good.
Okay.
Well done. This is a slide to say that all the things that we were talking about just now around assessment designed to decrease deliberate cheating will be talked about by Dr. Mike Reddy on the 5th of June. And many of the things that I was just talking about around contract cheating are in these solutions as well. So the answer is about setting a question where they have to make an answer, not find it. Starting earlier, we've already talked about that. And this checks for authenticity. Can you answer questions about your work? Those are the kinds of strategies. Can you move it on? So final point is that while most plagiarism is not cheating, it's still important. Plagiarism that is not cheating is really important because it's still plagiarism. And plagiarism means that students haven't used sources, they haven't shown their understanding, they haven't learned necessary and valuable skills, and they often have bypassed the hard work of learning. Learning defined as making your own sense of something, making something make sense for you, making something work for you and your thinking and your ideas. So can you move it on, Jill? So I'm now into this why question, not misconduct, but misuse of the rules of acknowledgement. Very, very briefly, can you move it on? Students misuse the rules because they fail to cite when they should. So for example, they assume common property and common knowledge in the ways that we were just talking about, when they should assume that this is work that goes to an identifiable or named source. They fail to use correct citation practices. And here I really need a word of warning, because one of the things that makes me saddest as I travel around the world talking to people about this is people's obsession with the formatting of citations. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about them misusing correct citation practices at the level of formatting. Does it have a comma? Should it be in italics? I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about failing to use correct acknowledgement. So they might forget their quote marks or give a reference list. So just to remind you, there will be a webinar on use of sources and misuse of referencing. And the answer to those things is skills teaching. Teaching students how to use sources, practice feedback has to happen over the whole program, and it can't just happen in one course. So in the little time we have left, let's move on, Jill. Let's pay attention to students' misunderstanding, particularly about copying, because that's where a lot of the cause of plagiarism happens. They don't understand what they should be doing or not doing around copying. If you want to know why students misunderstand plagiarism, listen to them talking about why they copy other people's work. Can you move it on? So plagiarism through misunderstanding, they say things like, go on, show them to us little by little. This person writes what I think. This person writes it better, writes English better. There is only one way. These are my words. I copied them myself. And I've heard students saying this all the time about copying, and you've probably heard them saying it too. Each one of these statements is a misunderstanding about how copying works and what they should be doing. So, Jill, if you could just reveal the bubbles little by little, not too fast. Here's the first one. If the student says, this person writes exactly what I think, then reading the bubble, the student misunderstands the importance of using sources to show authority, that authority I was talking about before. The student misunderstands the need to agree explicitly. This is quite important. Many of our students don't know that you can't just imply that you agree. You have to say it. You have to say, I agree. You can't expect the reader to know. Next bubble. If the person says, this person writes it better than I do, so they copy because the person writes it better, the student has misunderstood the importance of being an author. of writing words that you think up yourself. Because when you write words that you think up yourself, you're writing ideas that you think up yourself. That doesn't mean you have to use words that have never before been used by any human being, but it means that you have to go through the process of making your own work. Can you do the next one, Jill? If the student says, this person writes English better than I do, the teachers have given the student the idea that what they're interested in is a perfect product, whereas in fact what we're interested in is something made by the student. So we need to be really careful about not getting students to think that the perfection of the product is more important than the process of getting there. Can you do the next one? If the student says there is only one way to write this, that student doesn't understand the rules about common knowledge. And we've already said several times that those rules about common knowledge are really complicated to understand. If there really is only one way to write it, then it probably doesn't need a citation. However, if you use a citation, that could strengthen the authority of that statement. And the last one, where the student says, these are my own words, I copied them myself. And I've heard students say this. You wouldn't believe that they would say this, but they do. Could you do the next speech bubble, Jill? This student who says, I copied them myself, so that makes them my own words, doesn't understand how changing someone else's work makes it into your work. So this business about words being changed and so forth and so on are actually about you working with somebody else's work to make it your own work. So misunderstanding through how students describe what they're doing when they're copying is quite interesting. On to the next one, please. So we're down to this final confusion. We say to students, you must not take other people's work, but you must use other people's work. And that means you have to write from sources. Please click, Jill. This paradox, click again please, is unwrapped by this business of using work transparently. That means that students have to learn these skills that are listed at the bottom. They have to differentiate owned from not owned. They have to identify work that needs acknowledgement. They have to understand how to acknowledge, and they have to do the acknowledgement skillfully. Those are complicated things for students to do. On to the next one. So misunderstanding happens because it's complicated. It's really difficult to learn to use and acknowledge sources. Those of you around the world who are really just focused on copying, I have to stop students from copying. You've got to broaden your ideas to think about this using sources and using sources correctly and getting the skills to acknowledge and use other people's work as a source for your own. Now, one of the things that people say to me as I travel all over the world is, yes, students copy because it's cultural. And this is, the quotes around it's cultural. This is a very common explanation, but it needs to be treated with great care. It's absolutely true that what differs around the world in different contexts, so in different national systems, in different education settings, in different disciplines. So, for example, I was talking to somebody who was doing art history yesterday, and she was struggling with how do you use sources in art history? So sometimes the context is the discipline, sometimes it's a particular education system and so forth. So going back to my slide, what does differ in different contexts is how you use sources. So in art history, or in history, or in biology, it might be very different. The way you show your knowledge, how do you show that you know things? When I work in China, for example, the way you show you know things is you present that knowledge to the reader. That's a different way of showing your knowledge than I see in other places. The way you acknowledge other people. I've just come back from Vietnam. And one of the things that people keep telling me in Vietnam is that informal acknowledgement, ways of showing that you've used somebody else's ideas can be done informally. It can be done by the way that you write. It does not necessarily have to be done by using a Harvard citation, for example. There are differences in what seems polite and what seems insulting. In many places, it's very insulting to tell the reader things that you know the reader already knows. So we'll talk about that in a minute. And this business of balancing responsibility of the writer and the reader to make sense of the text. Around the world, people have very different ideas about the balance of responsibility between the reader and the writer for understanding the meaning of a text. Can you move to the next one, Jill? So these conventions for using other people's work, here are some statements. I write to show my ideas. I write to put knowledge before you. I write to make an argument. I write to show that I'm a member of the discipline. I write to show I'm making an effort, I'm working. They're all different reasons around the world why people write and what's the purpose of writing. Only some of them have a very clear sense of using referencing and citation, for example, in the way that I expect my students to do here in the United Kingdom. On to the next slide, please. So here's a chart of what I call writer responsibility and reader responsibility. Let's read this chart together. Under the first column on the left, where it says writer responsible use of sources, where students are working within a writer responsible place, for example, in the United Kingdom, we have a very writer responsible set of assumptions. The student writer must show where the ideas come from. And in the second box, the writer must say if they agree or disagree. They have to say it explicitly, using evidence in their writing. And the last box, the writer has to tell the reader what the writer has discovered, and the writer has to make that research transparent. If you look on the other side, if you look at the column that says reader responsible use of sources, instead of the writer showing, we can assume in reader responsible use of sources, the reader can be assumed to be an expert. The reader will know the source of materials in the student's writing. That's, for example, that's, by the way, what the art history student said to me. We don't cite because my teacher said to me in art history, I'll know the sources that you're using. The second box under reader responsible, the reader will judge whether the writer agrees or disagrees. The reader can assume that use of sources means agreement. Well, in some systems it does, and in some systems it doesn't. And finally, the reader does not want to be told what he or she already knows. If you tell a reader something they already know, that's very rude. So here we have two contrasting senses of what writing is for and what's the responsibility of the writer in that context. Can you move it on, please, Jill? So this new game, new rules is what lies behind a lot of misunderstanding. All students, whether they come from another country or they come from work or they come from sixth form or they come from practice or wherever they come from, they will need help to understand the rationale for using sources that applies where you are teaching. All students will need help knowing when and why they should knowledge. They don't know it. They really don't. They don't walk through your door knowing. They will need loads of practice to master citation systems and referencing systems. And some of them will be making a very big jump to new ways. So if you think about what I was saying just now about the purpose of writing, how you use sources, how you acknowledge, what's the responsibility of the reader or the writer. Some students will move from very different systems when they travel, for example, to study, or when they sign up for a distance learning course, or when they go back to university. They may be making a very, very big jump, and they're not going to jump quick. They're not going to jump easily. On to the next one. So until students master use of other people's work, can you do it? They are likely to plagiarize. Can you put up the questionnaire now, Jill, on how much misunderstanding and plagiarism happens? Is it going up? Ha! There you go. Here you go. Have a go at this one. Those of you who are still around. The question is, what percentage of the cases you deal with are misunderstanding? Misunderstanding in the way that I was talking about. I can see the question, but I can't see the votes. Jill, can you? Now I can see them. All right, this is interesting. Very strong voting for about 50% from misunderstanding. That's interesting because it doesn't quite match. Well, more coming in. It doesn't quite match with the previous answers about deliberate cheating. And again, it would be really interesting to know where those questions are coming from, those answers are coming from around the world, and what kinds of students you're talking about. Most people say about half of the. Could you give me back? Oh God.
Oh God.
It's gone, darling. Where's it gone to? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can't see the slides, and I can't see myself. But I'll just finish the talk. I'll just finish the talking, shall I?
Okay.
No,
Do you want
I'm
me to
back.
read the
All
slides?
right.
Shall I do the slides?
I've got it. So could you do the click just to finish this? Okay. So students are likely to plagiarize, and when they do, and those half that they need to be treated as learners. Keep going. And they need penalties that reflect this continued learning. So in the same way that they need high penalties to dissuade them from serious cheating, they need appropriate penalties that reflect their continuing learning. So this means the kinds of webinars and thinking that people are coming up with around penalties become very, very important at making this a fair and effective system. Keep going. And teachers need to agree when students have had enough time to learn and when they cross that line to deliberate cheating. And that has to be an agreement amongst teachers. Keep going. So just to finish up, this is my last slide. Why do students plagiarize? And the example is some of them do it because they want unfair advantages. Keep going. And for those, the intervention is high enough penalties to change their minds, more catching. If you don't catch enough of them, they will be more likely. And making sure that students know the consequences if they are caught. Don't tell them the number that you catch. Tell them the consequences for the students who are caught. And then why do they do it? The second set of answers, keep going, is because the rules of the game are really complicated. If you're going to use citation practices like they expect in my university, nobody's going to learn those quick. It takes a lot of time and practice, a lot of feedback. It's a program level responsibility. It can't be a single teacher or a single course or a single study skills unit. And so the intervention, Jill, is skills teaching and skills practice. Remember that skills teaching doesn't mean telling them. It means them actually doing it. And the last one, why do they do it? Because they misunderstand what we want. And the intervention is program level teaching, feedback, and practice. And there is no other way. There's no magic other solution than that one. So the final bit is come back to the webinar and you'll get lots more ideas about these other kinds of things. The last slide, Jill, can you put it up? Are a list of resources. I don't know if people can have access to this afterwards or how they might find these resources. But here are the resources I was using for this webinar, which I've just conducted. And in the few minutes that we have left, Jill, do you want to address that issue of how they can get a hold of slides or resources?
We can make the slides available to everyone who's attended, and we have also recorded the webinar, so we can also make that available. But that's not a problem. Okay, thank you very much, Jude.
In the few minutes we have left, do you want to do one more question, or shall we close? You've said very clearly to me we have to close on time. So.
Just look at. Does anyone have any further questions quickly for Jude? I think we've addressed most of the things. I mean, I think one of the key things that's come out for me is the new game, new rules thing, and I think that's, you know, it's so important. You know, where we hear a lot about students not coming to university, for example, without the skills, because they're coming to a completely new game. And you can imagine if you're a student coming from another culture, again, you're coming to a completely new game. So regardless of whether you're that student or whether you're in a completely different situation, I think that's very important to make that aware, and learning the rules of the game is very key. And I know that's something that you very much reinforce.
And the game changes between disciplines, between levels. It's not just international students, for example, who don't understand the game. The game changes in very, very complicated ways.
I'm not seeing any further questions, but I'm just going to put up the tip sheet that we mentioned at the beginning.
Okay.
So I'm just going to pop back to my slides from the beginning there. Hopefully my slides will progress. Okay, that's just to show you Jude, this tip sheet that we've produced really simplifies what Jude has said in her presentation, and obviously Jude's presentation has gone into a lot more depth. But this is the tip sheet that we've developed really around some of the issues why students plagiarize, which covers some of what Jude says, but in very briefly. But this is a resource which is available on our website. The URL's on the top there, and we can also send that through to people who've attended the webinar. And there will be further tip sheets as we go through the series, which form a series of 6, which go with the webinars. So I'd encourage people to have a look at the website. And also, as Jude mentioned, we do have more webinars. Next week's webinar is Identifying Plagiarism in Student Work, and that will be hosted by Wendy, who I know has been on the chat today, and she's coming to us from Australia, so that should be interesting with the technology. But join us again next week, next Wednesday. That will be at 10 a.m., which is British summertime. So if you go to our website, you will be able to convert that to your local time zone. But certainly, if you've enjoyed this webinar, I'd encourage you to come along to more. And I'd just like to thank Jude once more for joining us today. And I do apologise for all the technical issues. Jude has been our guinea pig, so hopefully next week everything should be fine. But thank you very much, Jude.
Okay, and I'll have a look at the chat. It looks very interesting. Now I can pay attention to it.
Okay, thanks, Jude.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Now, Paulina, how do I log out? Do I just hang up, do you think, or do I need to?
Yeah.
Maybe that's how we'll pay it. Perhaps the cost of the call is expensive. That's how I think of.
They usually do it like this, yeah, on the phone.
Now, what Paulina is saying is that she wants to register a student who's on the wait list, who's a study abroad student, and she wants us to register a student because the students themselves can't, because it's closed to study abroad, because it's now open to degree students. And she's saying nobody's told us that.
I need to check on the went from lots of people, I don't know if she was like that.
But maybe not Paulina. And I wonder about Dom.
I think Dom was
and we print it out and
Dom shouldn't know that anyway, because he's 28. Tuesday, I think.